Hello, beautiful and wonderful you. So thank you so much for coming by and hanging out with me. And I want to talk in this video about ego death. What is that? It's commonly, I'm seeing a lot of ego death being in relation to ceremonial shamanic practice. Ayahuasca seems to be something that seems to go with that, a lot of ego-based experiences. And I totally can see and understand how that works. I am not the most well-versed practitioner. I have just begun my journey, as it were, into that. But I am a fervent student of the spiritual world and the spiritual self. So in that regard, I definitely have a lot of experience behind me. But I have miles to go, miles and miles and miles to go. So not an expert, not an expert, disclaimer, not an expert. But the topic of ego death, I came across a couple of videos as I was just checking out YouTube and seeing that came up a lot, and in relation to the topics that I was watching. And it was, again, like I said, around shamanic, ceremonial type of things, and spiritual stuff. It seems to come up a lot, and something about that really rubs me the wrong way. What is it about the term ego death, or a Westerner's use of the term, that just seems to really not work for me? I think it's the notion of this thing that you leave behind, that it's no longer you, that you're no longer, it's just gone. And that's what I think death really signifies, especially in Western culture, is to be left behind. I think there might be, and just because of the repetitiousness of my noticing this, the synchronicity of this, is that it seems to be almost synonymous with the shamanic practice. It seems to be some sort of an automatic correlation that seems to be out there, maybe, or that people might assume that one goes with the other. And I can't speak for everyone, but I can say, because my experience is different, I know for a fact that it's not for everyone. So I can tell you from my own experience and my own perspective about this, and offer perhaps a much easier way of being with this, because I feel that the term ego death, it's too severe, it's too absolute, it's too much absolution with that. And I don't feel that that is what a lot, if not the majority of people experience. Having been in a communal setting for my ceremonial practice, I get to talk to a lot of people. And so far, it's been probably at least 100 people that I've been able to have a conversation with about their experience with this. And not a single one of them have ever said ego death. So I don't know if that's something that you've come across, but I want to let you know that that is not generally the idea or the notion of what happens. Now, this isn't talking about ecotourism, where people go to Peru and decide to do a shamanic ceremony with a shaman they've never met, with someone they do not know, in a quantity and a volume that is not recommended for a majority of people. So that's another disclaimer there. Those people experience things that I can't even begin to compare to. So that's not the environment I'm speaking to. I'm speaking to much more of a healing, nurturing environment that's still very, very powerful. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of people who I've been in a ceremony with that had a very hard time with it. So it's not that it's all butterflies and rainbows. That's not it at all. So the ego death thing, I can see how it could come up if somebody were to do a very intense spiritual ceremonial practice and they come out of that feeling completely disconnected from who they were. that I could see being qualified as an ego death. But I'm going to be talking more about what I think that this process is about and how we relate to the ego in my own perspective, and hopefully offer some perhaps solace to others who might see that term and it scares them, as it rightly would, most certainly. So that's where I'm coming from. So ego death versus the ego, just having the ego, being with the ego, wanting to get rid of the ego. I've dealt with all of this, not the ego death part, but I've dealt with not wanting my ego, just wanting it to go away, feeling like it was inhibiting or stagnating my process, my spiritual process of freedom and liberation, and fully allowing. And that's all true. That is all true. As I have recently been opened up to, is that the ego is how we identify ourselves. It is the kind of signpost you put out in front of your house that says, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, this is my beliefs. And those are that's like a network, a spider web of associations that are made, which ranges all over the place. From identifying, an example would be for me, I identify as a redhead, I identify as somebody who wears glasses, I identify as an Anglo, I identify as a woman, I identify as an artist, I identify as a person who is very emotionally centered. These are all identities that I have. And those are all true because I have all those characteristics, or I display those characteristics in my interactions with people or in my world around me. But to identify with it as that is who I am is the ego. That's how I have come to understand. This also can go as far as I am not a good person, I am not creative, I am not lovable, my goals are not worth me putting myself into a new place in order to accomplish these goals. Those are, again, aspects of the ego, the identity of the self. The ego is something that I have encountered has been very stubborn to change. It's very resistant to evolution. It is the voice in your head that tells you that it scares you away from those changes. That's how it appears in my experience, is that it'll tell me all of the nasty, gnarly, kind of evil things that the world is. And the reality is that I've experienced the world in a much brighter light. There's challenges to be faced. There's negative things about, there's things that we wish wouldn't happen as a humanity. But that the ego tells me that I can't be something because of all of this. That's also the ego. So when people think that they want to kill their ego, they want ego death, that they're going for that in a spiritual conquest, that they're going to achieve this, that go ahead if you want to achieve that. I will say, though, that after my research and reading up to this point, that to desire to completely disconnect from all that you were in order to be who you want to be, to sever that like a line, just cut it off, can actually create a psychological disorder. There's been a few cases where people have taken psychoactives that hundreds and thousands of people have taken no problem, but it's too high of a dosage and they go into a psychosis. And it's a dissociative psychosis where they can't relate to who they are. And so that, to me, is the extreme of ego death. Again, not a psychologist. I'm not expressing an opinion on any of that. I'm just going through my observations and offering what I have to offer. So I'm going to still start there. It's a little sad that I have to say this throughout videos in order to make sure people don't go crazy with this and our society is very attached, and there we go ego. They attach to things. They want to connect with things so strongly to identify by or to say, I am not that. So that's how the ego works. It tells you who you are and who you aren't. That's it. It's as simple as that. What I experienced in my most recent spiritual awareness is that the ego is not an enemy. It is not there to harm you. It is not there to hurt you. It's just a role it plays. And this is the most important part that I know this is universally true. The ego only is fed by you. It is given everything it needs by you. The world around you doesn't feed it. It's what you give to it. It's what you feed it. It's like your heart. You feed your heart. You give it love. You give it nurturing. You give yourself compassion. You give yourself connections with other people. You give yourself, activities or experiences that nurture you. You feed yourself. This is all food. This is all medicine, as it were. The world is full of medicine, and it's how we treat ourselves. It's how we comfort ourselves. It's how we heal ourselves, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. So the ego has a part to play. It actually is a very important part to play. But it's how we relate to it that is what it becomes. The ego is very bastardized in our country, in the Western world and Western society, where it's been said that you're an egotistical person. That's a person who's very full of themselves. That is the ego. That is the ego. That's over-identifying with external parameters. The internal self can also do that, but the difference is that those internal notions I'm figuring for myself they can go with the ego. The ego can relate to those things and identify by them, but they are almost always expressed externally. So it's not how the internal self relates to it. It's how it's pushed out and given to the world around. And this is why spiritual people themselves can be led astray. They over-identify with the role they're playing as a spiritually awakened person, and they may have good things to say, but it can very quickly go sour because they become power hungry. They strive for the goals, the things that they wish to pursue through those endeavors, which is this idea of power and control, which is usually very ego-based reactions to the world around you, is what I've come to see for myself and others. But the idea that the ego is something inherently evil or inherently bad, I don't think that that's true. As Westerners, I think that we live with that notion, and especially if we've embarked on a spiritual journey or a path, is that the ego is not okay. It's not okay to have one. It's not okay to exist with one, that you're bad if you have one, that, a lot of negative connotations with it. But what I figured out most recently is that my ego is actually how I identify the difference between myself and others. And if I practice the Buddhist teaching of unattachment and fluidity, of the idea of the element of water, flowing with ourselves and with the world around us, that we have no sharp edges, that we just flow around things and we observe them. Very gentle, very simple. Water is also very powerful. So we can be in our space without being overwhelmed or encumbered by another. The fluidity allows us to be in every space. So the ego, allowing that fluidity in yourself in the practice of the elements. I did a Hermetic practice, then I still have to continue. I'm in my last element right now, but I'm pausing because I'm having a lot of spiritual integration going on. But to study each of the 4 elements in a 3-week process. And the Hermetic practice has a regiment for this, basic outline of how to do this. So you can look in that direction. But shamanism and other things like that use the elements in the religious and spiritual practice of it. Excuse me, I've got the hiccups. I highly recommend checking it out. It's by connecting through the elements that I've actually really grounded myself and found a part of me that I had no idea existed. And by doing that, I discovered what parts of the elements are in me. What part of me is earth? How does that feel? What part of me is air? How does that feel? Air is thought. Air is it's air, it's thought. Thoughts are just air. Water is our emotions, and fluidity and feeling that self becoming very malleable you're not, it's letting go of the identity isn't about becoming anything that anybody wants. That's, I think, the fear, is that if I don't identify with all these things, that I will become no one. I will become nothing. And the reality is actually no. That's actually not what I have experienced in my own efforts of this. It's actually become one of, the ego allows me to say, when I notice something different between myself and another, something I have or something I am that this person is not, that I can't observe of them, that just tells me they haven't awoken to that yet. And that's how I practice my spiritual projection or insight to the other, is to see the reason why I see this in myself and not in another is because that's in me, in this place, in this time. This is a resonance that I have. And the reason why they don't have it is they just don't. They haven't gotten to that point. That isn't their goal. That isn't their point in life. That isn't their spiritual evolution. And it allows for a fluidity between me and this person. And instead of finding a reason to not like them because they aren't like me. And that's where I've discovered the greatest power of the ego is a rather disdainful disgust of another because they haven't gained the insight or the awareness. And I know that people, when they psychologically, when they move away from something that they've just come from, that you're going to have a much stronger abhorrence for it. It's going to be much stronger that you're going to want to stay away from it. And it's because it's too fresh and too new. To stay away from the thing you just came from is a way of separating yourself, a way of being that newer self, that evolution self, that whatever that part you've grown into. So it makes sense, just like you would stay away from, if you've quit doing the party lifestyle, you very likely wouldn't go hang out with the friends you partied with all the time because you know what's going to happen. It's just the lifestyle, it's the environment. You want to stay away from that because you want to really embody the part of you that is this is this person, that is this newfound experience. So the ego is just that knowing of separation. And in effort to be with it, I've allowed myself to fully open up and be exactly who I am and not put any constraints on it, any barriers, any restrictions. And what I discovered is that this part of me that wants to identify with things goes as far as what I can and cannot do in my daily life. When I opened up and allowed myself to realize that I'm a very emotionally centered person, which I will tell you was a hard endeavor. It took me a lot of strength and courage to do it for myself. That's a very vulnerable place for me, right? I was raised being told that that's not how you are. You're strong, you're this warrior kind of person, and that's not who I am. I have strengths in my heart. My heart is my strength. And once I once I allowed myself to fully be that really stronger part of myself, not the mind, but the feeling. And when I felt who I was, all of a sudden the ego, it wasn't, there's a beautiful song by East Forest. It's called God Mother Sphere. And it's, let's see, I think it's Godmother Sphere or something like that, but check out East Forest on Spotify. Fabulous artist, love his music. But it's a beautiful, beautiful song, and he says that his ego is his friend. And that was a song that hit me, that I found right before I left to go to do my week in ceremony. And it was profound and amazing, and I'm genuinely grateful that somebody like him makes music to those softer side of things, to the side of the self that can exist without the additional pain and suffering of our own making. And the ego is a very big battle that we feel like we wage all the time. And I know a lot of people who they shy away from it completely because, I'm not ego-based. Well, if you identify not as ego-based, that's the ego. You're just identifying. That's all you're doing. And the ego, I'm trying to help strip off and remove the negative connotations to it, because I've lived with a very negative connotation to that. And once I came into this place of, it's not here to harm me. Nothing in my life is here to harm me. I've only put in the strictures, the restraints, the barriers, the impasses. I put all of those in. The ego did nothing. It is just there. It's like a tool that can be used for good or for evil, as it were, right? For your benefit or for not your benefit, right? So the ego death thing, I'm not saying those people haven't had that. I'm just saying, please, as your own spiritual self, if that scares you, just turn it off. Turn it off, turn it off. You don't need to hear that. That's not who you are. That's somebody else. If any part of you instinctually becomes afraid of something you hear or something you're observing, just back away from it and see how that feels. Our ego has told us that we aren't who we are, and so we've pushed ourselves into places that we aren't comfortable, into situations that we don't want to really actually be in. And I have tried to be somebody that I wasn't this whole time, with glimpses into my true self in phases of it. And each morning I wake up and I don't know how my day is going to be. And I will say that this morning I woke up and a lot of fear came into me. I have fear that my expansion that happened was going to go away, that I was going to lose it. I had a general calm and peace state of mind that became a part of my experience as a result of my being ill, which was actually quite a blessing in a very interesting way. But I'm the only person in the group who can look at it that way. So every experience is unique to every individual, and I can't tell anybody else who I got sick with that this illness is a wonderful gift, because they all suffered in varying quantities and varying ways. But I see the benefit of it. I didn't enjoy it, and I still am not enjoying some of the process of this getting well. That part's a little bit, it's a little frustrating, but I know that in the end it's going to teach me more about who I am. And I love and I welcome that, because it's me coming into this place of, it's not the ego, it's the who I am. It's not the things that I stand around and identify myself by. It's how I feel. It's how I relate. It's how I, touching a plant with my spiritual heart and feeling that resonance come back to me. That's who I am. So it's a very arduous process. It can be very challenging. I've had a full year of very, focused spiritual effort. All my moments were very observant. I was very observant of them and allowing a lot of room, and it took a lot of my effort to do that because I didn't want to be there. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted it to go away. And unfortunately, that's where the ego gets its greatest strength from. It gets in the sense that it can have a strength from you helping it or you ignoring it, and it just does what it wants, because it does have a mind of its own. It does exist whether or not you acknowledge it. So it's the thing that makes you feel bad. It's the thing that puts you in starch, like contrast to someone else. Like, you are not me, so you must be less than me. That's the ego. The ego can also be that simple thing that says, oh, I noticed the difference. And that's all it becomes. I just noticed the difference. I am different than you in this very specific way. I'm an emotionally centered person. This person is not an emotionally centered person. They're more intellectually centered. That's the difference. That's all it is. So the fluidity, practicing the elements I found, and then embarking on this allowance and this journey of exploring my own identity and the ego, as it were, really allowed me to come into a place of allowance. And that's my goal throughout all that I do, is for allowance and greater allowance and greater space for myself and a larger and larger container for myself, which, interestingly enough, the more that I offer myself is the more that I can offer others. I can allow space for other people to be just as they are. And I'm still encountering some frustration with that, but that's okay. That's completely all right, as long as I'm very much aware and observing. That's all I need to do. So there's a lot of psychological stuff that goes into this. I definitely recommend seeing therapists that you really trust, and very much connect with. It helps to to abate the logical left side of the brain that really wants to overthink things. And then it creates a space where the emotional side can relate. And those two sides of our experience, the logic, the side that thinks and the side that feels, can perhaps come in and integrate a little bit better, come in and work with each other instead of it being one against the other, things pitted against the other. And the ego does that. So allow more, observe more, create a space that says, okay, let's just look at this for what it is and just observe and not judge. Because judgment is what feeds it in the negative, harmful, hurtful way that puts us against other people, puts us against ourselves. So the experience that I've had, I hope this has provided some comfort to you, maybe some insight that helps you on your own process and your own spiritual journey, on your own path. And if there's, if you like this, please let me know. Thumbs ups are always helpful indications of if topics are resonating with others. Comments too. If you have any questions, if I could offer some, some insight, or if you have a question about something that I've brought forth, please just let me know. I enjoy the conversation with others, and I enjoy being able to discuss this further with others. So, any questions or anything else? So. Okay, thanks. Bye.